The biggest thing is, reaching out and speaking to someone.
Tonight, looking after your mental and spiritual health over the holidays.
Who cares about the translation? If we have a resolution that's there in English, let's go with it.
Plus, heated debate over the use of French at the AFN.
This, for us, is life.
And a look at how the economy works in an Arctic community. Good evening, Tansei. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Take time to check in with yourself and take a break. That's the advice of a Manitoba MMIWG liaison unit to deal with the sadness many people may have during the holiday season. APTN's Leanne Sanders has more.
Christmas can bring a mixed bag of emotions, especially to family members who suffered a tragic loss of a loved one. Heidi Spence says it's important to make social connections at this time of year, but also to look after your basic needs.
Getting enough rest and getting enough to eat also is really important, because it affects your mental health. Like if you're not sleeping or if you're not eating, that does a lot to your mind as well.
Spence says sometimes taking a break from your devices is needed and essential.
There's a lot in the news and especially as well on social media too, right? So sometimes, just kind of unplugging and taking a step back, to kind of filter through some of the stuff that, you've been exposed to throughout the day.
MKO is on shutdown now for the holidays, but Spence says they will still have help available to all who need it.
We have posted numbers of who's on call and which days, and that allows family members and people to call, to reach out, to speak if it's just that they need someone to talk to. We have staff available that are, trained and they're trauma informed. But, the biggest thing is, reaching out and speaking to someone and not let those feelings of being isolated kind of come in, because it's really important to be able to talk and to put how you're feeling someplace and someplace safe.
For more information, you can contact Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Liaison, Manitoba Kiiwetinoong Okimakanak Inc., toll-free 1-800-442-0488. Leanne Sanders, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
In BC, Youth in Care will start receiving a $600 monthly rental supplement to help transition on their own. The money is part of a provincial program, but as APTN's Lee Wilson tells us, one group helping kids out of care would like to see even more supports.
According to the BC government, youth in care are at a higher risk of experiencing homelessness. This spring, the province announced $35 million over 3 years to help youth as they transition out of the government's care. This month, nearly 800 youth transitioning will start receiving $600 a month rental supplement from the BC Ministry of Children and Families. Angela Janelle is a youth program coordinator for Commodity Friendship Society in Terrace, BC. She thinks the funding is great, but believes youth will need more support.
I think having $600 to cover the cost of living is absolutely necessary. And I think potentially they're going to need more supplements. The cost of living in Terrace and throughout Canada is skyrocketing.
44% of the youth receiving the supplemental funding identify as Indigenous. Janelle believes Indigenous cultural funding is important to help youth transition successfully.
They need to provide the support to cover, things like ceremony or those cultural programs that they've been missing, like language, attending feasts, or having those cultural connections that really bring that sense of belonging, and that sense of identity is super important in anyone's development.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
And we want to hear what you think about the stories you have seen to start our show tonight. Here's how to continue the conversation. You can send your emails to news@aptn.ca, or you can leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal has just released its full decision on compensation for First Nations child welfare. Now, a few months ago, the tribunal rejected the financial settlement agreement between Canada and the Assembly of First Nations, and 2 weeks ago, chiefs signed a resolution that the AFN work out a deal with Canada. We're now joined by Cindy Blackstock, the Executive Director of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society. Cindy, thanks so much for joining us here on the show. The tribunal's full decision on compensation was just released earlier this week. You have described the decision as striking. Why is that?
Well, because I think it really makes a strong evidentiary case for making sure that once the tribunal recognizes that people have suffered from discrimination, as they did in this case, they actually called that suffering egregious, Daryl, and they award compensation. They said, we're not going to change that unless there's evidence that comes forward that says that these people did not suffer or suffered less. And that didn't happen in this case. So they really stepped up to the plate to make sure that those victims who had suffered at the hands of Canada do get the $40,000 plus interest that they are already legally entitled to.
Now, Cindy, one point made in this decision is that Canada's cap of $20 billion is at fault. Can you explain this for us and what it means for the victims?
Sure. When you hear the number $20 billion, you think, wow, that's a lot of money. And it is. But keep in mind that Canada hurt so many people over such a long period of time that when you break it down to an individual level, it actually turns out to not be an extraordinary amount. And when Canada capped that final settlement agreement at $20 billion and included a lot more people, it turned out to not be enough money. And the tribunal said Canada can't play that kind of legal game to try and protect itself. It already hurt these victims. It owes these victims the money, and it should be paying that amount, even if it's more than $20 billion.
Well, so could this decision impact the resolution that was signed by the chiefs?
I think that it actually gives effect to that resolution, because what the chiefs have said is that those persons who are already legally entitled to their $40,000 plus interest should get it. And we should also compensate more people. And if we can, give those folks from the tribunal decision even more than the $40,000 when their suffering has been greater. So I think this is right in line with what the chiefs have passed in December.
And Cindy, given everything that's happened and everything that you had just said, where do you go from here? What happens next in this?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, one of the things that comes out for big criticism in that decision is that Canada, in its communication with victims who are entitled to this $40,000, really weren't saying, whoops, well, some of you actually are not going to get anything under this final settlement agreement, and some of you are going to get less. So it calls on Canada to tell the truth to victims, because that's the least that they owe them after everything they did. So what I'm hoping will happen is that that final settlement agreement will be amended, that Canada will put in more money so that all the victims who are legally entitled to $40,000 plus interest, Daryl, they get their money. And not only do they get the money, they get access to the supports for their wellness. These people have suffered unbelievable harms. We can't forget that. Their families were separated. Some of the children died as a result of being denied services, and families were taken apart. So Canada has to pay the money, and it's Canada that is holding things up. And I would like to see Canada drop its legal fights against First Nations kids and get to work in honoring their obligations to them.
Well, certainly a lot to think about, Cindy. We really appreciate you coming on. Thanks for this.
Hey, thanks, Daryl.
All right, we have to step aside for a short break, but still ahead, find out what fishing, sewing, and Arctic sports all have in common.
What we've known since we were little, we rely on it, our own nutrients, and it is really expensive.
Welcome back to APTN National News. There was plenty of division to account for at this year's AFN Special Chiefs Assembly. But one topic that sparked an unexpected debate was the use of French during the Assembly's proceedings. Here's an explainer from Shushan Bécon, voiced and translated by Lindsay Richardson.
We should be putting our kids first before process. But again, we're going to deal with everything else except our children. Who cares about the translation? If we have a resolution that's there in English, let's go with it. We are all English speakers here. Thank you.
Chief Delbert Wapas was clearly not pleased with delays while waiting for the Assembly of First Nations to pass a resolution at the most recent Special Chiefs Assembly just a few weeks ago. He blamed the speed of the French translation, and that rubbed Chief Jean-Charles Pétachot of the Innu Council of Iqaluit the wrong way.
On avait un président. C'était les premières fois qu'on avait la présidence bilingue. Il y a quelqu'un de l'Ouest qui s'est levé en disant à notre président qui parlait français de se taire. Puis dans le temps, on avait Max Gros, lui était encore là, il y avait Joe Norton, tous les chefs de la région du Québec, on s'est levé et on s'est collé au mur, comme ça. Puis on a dit, ici, là, on n'est pas respecté. Premièrement, c'est pas notre langue, le français, c'est notre langue seconde. Et on exprime la façon que vous exprimez en anglais. L'anglais, c'est pas votre langue maternelle, mais vous exprimez dans cette langue-là. On respecte, on vous respecte, alors respectez-nous.
Pétachot was elected chief of his community back in 1991 and has participated in all AFN assemblies since that time. He says in their infancy, the AFN assemblies didn't offer simultaneous translation services as they do today, and all hard copy reports were distributed in English only. Since then, the situation has somewhat improved for Francophones at the AFN Assembly. There is an English-speaking Master of Ceremonies and a bilingual co-presenter who speaks French, but the AFN's programming remains mostly English. Ghislain Picard, Regional Chief of the Assembly First Nations Quebec-Labrador, told APTN the use of French is actually protected under the AFN Charter.
La langue anglaise n'est pas une langue autochtone. Je pense que si on doit faire valoir l'importance de nos langues, la précarité de nos langues, on doit le faire en respectant l'histoire respective de chacune de nos nations.
However, the chiefs of the AFN are not the only ones reacting to the inclusion of French at the summit.
Which is the rules of procedure.
Just look at the comment section on APTN's event live stream as a French resolution was being read. Why does the AFN prioritize French over our languages? Or, concerning an address by the bilingual co-presenter, I'm disappointed that this is the person presiding. Clearly English is not their first language. Chief Wapas didn't return APTN's request for comment, and Chief Pétachot, for his part, would prefer to speak in Innu. He hopes the AFN will one day bring in a translator from his region.
C'est pas que je fais la promotion de la langue française, surtout pas, sauf c'est ma langue seconde, puis moi je veux pas apprendre l'anglais parce que j'ai des raisons pour ça.
He feels the language diversity shared among Canada's 633 First Nations communities is something that should be promoted and celebrated, not controlled. A story by Shushan Bécon, APTN National News, Ottawa.
All right, and now we'll finally know the answer to the question, what does fishing, sewing, and Arctic sports all have in common? Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs traveled to the high Arctic to see how many Nunavummiut lifestyles incorporate all three. Here's that story.
For generations, Inuit economy has been based on traditional harvesting. In the roughly 1,600-person community of Blackstock, strong ties to the land mean sustenance for food, clothing, tools, games, and art. Located in western Nunavut along the Arctic Ocean and Coppermine River, this bay is a popular spot for locals. Wesley Kemiuk fishes to feed a family of 10.
Fish for us is life. 5 times a week we'll have fish. Sometimes you'll catch a lot, but it all takes patience.
Even though they're competing with a nearby seal today, They'll still catch char, coney, whitefish, cisco, cod, and devilfish, to name a few.
What we've known since we were little. Yeah. We rely on it, our own nutrients, and it is really expensive. Like half a fillet of a char would go $30, $40.
Come a little bit closer, you're a little too far out. And
Arctic sports have been a cornerstone of their outdoor training.
the meaning for these games was to prepare the men back in the days for hunting and trapping and traveling. So it was a test of strength and your endurance.
Not only do Arctic sports contribute to traditional economy, they also provide cultural exchange opportunities for folks to travel to other northern communities.
It died out for quite a few years, so we've got to get the sport back in there again and get the youngsters into it.
The land, water, and sky provides. To be out on the tundra, you need the best gear possible. You'll find that here at the sewing program.
But you need to see it first before you make your mind on it.
Where my mom and my granny sewed for me to have warm clothing to travel by skidoo and sled. So I just wanted to carry on the tradition and make more modernized warm clothing.
Jennifer Onagak is an instructor for the 4-month program and says many here benefit from the flexibility and income sewing provides.
It does help us a lot because I was a stay-at-home mom for years, and this is what I really enjoy. I look forward to coming to work every day, so it does have a positive impact. And lots of these other ladies are moms too, and we could all relate to taking some time to ourselves.
Participant Megan Klinkenberg says while there's an interest in Inuit art, it's still largely misunderstood by Canadians who don't grasp how important this resource is to Nunavummiut.
The fur is really expensive. The cheapest fur you could probably get is sealskin, and that's not even cheap. People want it for a low price, but that price doesn't match up to the fur, the material, the time. Yeah. They want an expensive parka for a very cheap price, and that's not okay.
In Nunavut, many things are cyclical, including cultural commerce, using and developing resources by blending traditional with contemporary living. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Klokchak.
All right, time to step aside one more time. Tonight, photo of the day and weather are next. Plus, we'll have more on the extreme weather happening across Canada.
So one of the things that we're doing in preparation is we're actually now going to be taking some of our equipment and parking them at various locations across the city.
Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Patrick Primo shared this picture from Muskeg Lake Reserve in Saskatchewan of a solar halo. It's a very cool shot there. Thank you so much for sharing that one, Patrick. Got a good eye for sure. If you want to be featured as our photo of the day, you can email your pictures to share@aptn.ca. All right, now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting over in the east, 3 degrees in Charlottetown and 6 in Halifax. -5 in Cartwright and clear, and -12 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. -7 in Quebec City and -5 in Montreal. 3 degrees in Toronto and 0 in North Bay. -3 in snow in Timmins and -22 in Sioux Lookout. -25 in Churchill and -22 in God's Lake. -20 in Gimli and -19 in Winnipeg. Clear and -27 in Regina and clear and -29 in Saskatoon. -24 in Buffalo Narrows and -27 in Stony Rapids. As we move west, -29 in Fort Chipewyan and -31 in Snow and Peace River. -20 in Edmonton and -13 in Lethbridge. 0 degrees and a bit more snow in Vancouver and 0 degrees in Campbell River. -1 in Prince Rupert and -35 in Fort Nelson. And the cold continues, minus 45 in Dawson and minus 43 in Mayo. Minus 29 in Norman Wells and minus 36 in Fort Simpson. Minus 20 in snow in Fort McPherson and minus 20 in Inuvik. Clear and minus 35 in Cambridge Bay and minus 17 in Chesterfield. Minus 19 in Arctic Bay and minus 10 in Iqaluit. There is a severe winter weather alert today affecting millions of Canadians coast to coast. There are weather warnings or advisories currently in place for every province and territory across Canada except Manitoba. There is extreme cold in the west with another snowstorm moving into the south coast of British Columbia. In eastern Canada, a big storm system in the U.S. is moving in and will hit Ontario, Quebec, and all of Atlantic Canada with a mix of snow, freezing rain, and strong winds. That is set to begin tonight and go through tomorrow. The worry, of course, is holiday travel plans being disrupted, whether by train, plane, or automobile. Toronto and surrounding areas are expected to get rain or snow, followed by plummeting temperatures tomorrow, a potential flash freeze, and blizzard-like conditions. The city says it's monitoring the storm and deploying equipment to strategic areas.
So one of the things that we're doing in preparation is we're actually now going to be taking some of our equipment and parking them at various locations across the city. We call that loaded standby, where in essence you already have the vehicles close to their routes so that it minimizes the downtime from driving to a yard such as this to ultimately their routes. The weather is going to change extremely quickly. There's going to be high winds, so we have to try to get on top of it as quickly as we can.
All right, and now it's time for Nation to Nation host Fraser Needham to tell us what's coming up on the last episode of the year.
Sadly, 2022 was not a good year for Indigenous women. They continue to fill Canadian prisons at alarming rates, with no indication this trend will be reversed anytime soon. Indigenous women also continue to go missing or be murdered in cities such as Saskatoon, Winnipeg, and Ottawa. Tonight we'll try to provide some insight on why Indigenous women continue to be poorly served by Canadian society. It's all coming up on Nation to Nation right after the news.
And as we know, it's the season of Yuletide Cheer, but this next story brings us Muletide Cheer. People in Bosnia compete dressed as Santa Claus, and they ride donkeys, not reindeer, in a race for a shiny trophy. This year's winner was a donkey named Blue Racer. Well, I guess a big congratulations goes out to Blue Racer, and I can't say I wouldn't want to be in that race myself. But that is all we have for you tonight on APTN National News. If you missed any of our stories and you want to catch up, you can head to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Daryl Stranger. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. Chimigwich, and look after one another.